Imagine your days filled as a factory worker in the early 1900s. It is difficult, laborious action. Your muscles ache, your body is weary from 12 hours of continuous strain. Quitting is not an option, as your family depends on your income, however minuscule. The building itself is filled with dust, and the machinery is dangerous in its inception, especially difficult to operate while tired. You must stand on an overturned bin in order to reach the top of the machine. This is because you are not yet 5 feet and only 8 years old. This life is a stark contradiction to the life children in America know now. This is thanks to the child labor laws, the first being the Keating-Owen Act of 1906. First proposed by Senator Beveridge in 1906, laws we don't even realize have changed our society so drastically from what it once was. Lower-class families were both dependent on the extra income and inundated with the normalizing culture of child workers, usually because they themselves had once been child workers. Children were often married off against their will, became servants, sent away, and received harsh punishments. 7 years old was seen as the age of reason for centuries. Past that age, they were often seen merely as small adults. Children now are mostly viewed as carefree and treasured, but back then they were seen as abundant and as burdens that must contribute to the family. Luckily, this societal crisis did not go unnoticed. Lewis Hines, an accomplished photographer and sociologist, began a campaign of photographing children at work while advocating with the National Child Labor Committee. Hine himself had been a child laborer after his father had died, and his family desperately needed the extra income. Hine worked over 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, for an average of $4 a week. He traveled across the country, featuring children in factories, on farms, in fields, and in mines. His mission was to illuminate the situation to upper-class people and catch the sympathy in hopes of motivating them to advocate for changing laws. The mission was dangerous and illegal, so he pretended to be various salesmen or an industrial photographer coming to record the machinery from headquarters. Once the child labor laws were in place, Hines shifted his gaze to the working conditions of women and an introspective series on homemakers, a deeply unappreciated career in his opinion. Before this public campaign, child labor was the mainstream. According to the 1900 National Census, 1.75 million children from ages 10 to 15 years were working over today's standard full-time hours to sustain their families. This exhausting responsibility also came with adult perks. Children often relaxed by drinking and smoking after a long day's work. Even Hine documented cases of young boys frequenting brothels. The line between adulthood and childhood was not just blurred, it was bleeding into one another. This was not a problem isolated to the city. In even the heart of rural areas, this culture was deeply ingrained. Children picked crops, gathered bushels before and after school, even helping with laundry or seamstress work their mother would bring home. It was just expected for children to contribute as equals, while also being treated akin to family property with little actual freedom in their life choices. Childhood was a luxury. On June 25, 1938, the Fair Labor Standard Act was passed and officially ended the legal employment of children under 18 years old. This law has since been modified that children at 16 can legally work, but with heavy restrictions, mostly on an emphasis of their schoolwork and school hours. However, this only brought the end to American child labor, not worldwide. In 2013, numbers placed 10.5 million child laborers across the world, according to the International Labor Organization. The most popular brands that consumers participate in, like Hershey's and Mars, Apple and Nike, and the fast fashion industry including Forever 21, Target, and H&M, depend on child labor. Unfortunately, the ghastly nature of child labor hasn't changed, only changed faces. The problem is removed from America. The children used are not our own. These children are brown and live far removed in countries we often don't see beyond all-inclusive resorts. While you observe Hines' photos, the proof of American past crimes, do you feel a sigh of relief? We must not forget the issue only became more complicated, not eradicated. Organizations like the Child Labor Coalition, Human Rights Watch, and Amnesty International are all leading campaigns to protect child workers around the world by fighting for their right to education, health, safety, and their well-being. Their goal is not to outlaw child labor specifically, but to stop the exploitation of children. The fight for the end of exploitation begins with you, the consumer. We vote with our wallets. Make it known to big brands that their unsafe labor practices make you question your brand loyalty to them. In the current day and age, these protests can exist even online through social media, a presence highly valued by companies that value their image. Support brands that value fair trade and fair trade practices. Vote for government officials that voice their support for international labor ethics and implementing stricter guidelines for American companies exporting their labor and production.